when a climatic event of extreme ferocity hits any country. I mean, let's just look at Pakistan, and I use that because that is one of the most sad recent examples of what has happened. A third of Pakistan is underwater. That is the same size as the United Kingdom. We've got 33 people who are facing displacement, millions who are facing food security issues, and also, incredibly sadly, you've got 3.5 million children there struggling to get to school, 24,000 schools destroyed or unable to open, and that's what we also need to address. There is that sort of long-term, medium-term issue with climate change, but the immediate impacts on education as a result of a climatic event. To discuss all of these issues, we've got a stellar cast here. So I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves briefly, and then I'm going to put some questions to them, and we'll go along at pace on this so that we can give some time for you all to ask questions as well. So firstly, can I ask my colleague and friend Baroness Barron perhaps introduce herself?
Good morning, everyone. My name's Diana Barron, and I'm a minister in the Department for Education in London with responsibility for sustainability within the education system.
Hi, good morning. Tariq Al-Gurg, I'm with Dubai Cares, and we are a non-government organization based in Dubai. We do everything in education, everything in SDG 4, from early childhood development.
Panel is, can you tell us how you're creating opportunities for children and young people to learn about and understand climate change and to live sustainably? So in short, what are you doing on this issue which is practical and pragmatic? So we'll start at this end and we'll sort of vary it as we go through the questions. So Baroness Barron, please.
Thanks so much, and it's a great place to start. Our approach to this issue has been really to try and take as comprehensive a strategy as we possibly can, and there's a number of legs to it. The first relates to the curriculum, so having both specialist subjects within the curriculum dedicated to climate and sustainability issues, but also making sure that climate and sustainability are woven through the curriculum, making sure that we equip our teachers and leaders to feel really confident in teaching on those issues and empowering young people really to contribute. The second leg, and I think this picks up perhaps on something Elizabeth just mentioned, relates to the kind of experience young people have of nature and of the environment really close to them. So we're building a national education nature park, which will be a virtual nature park. So every school in the country will be mapping the biodiversity of their school estate, being able to compare it to other schools, developing the skills that you get from doing that. And connected to that also, we're developing a series of what we're calling Climate Leaders Awards, although I was told last night they're not going to be called Climate Leaders Awards, but you get the idea, where we will recognise either at primary school level the efforts of a whole school to contribute to these issues, and at secondary level of individual students and what they have achieved. And we really hope that that'll be something that which will be recognised by employers. I could talk much more, but I'll hand over to others at that point.
Thank you for that, Baroness Barron. And can I just say that I think they should be called Climate Leaders Awards, and I will work with you to see how we can make sure that happens. Tariq, over to you.
Well, thank you, Alok. I mean, we're a global philanthropic organization. We work in 60 countries, providing education to more than 21 million children and youth. And to reach that level of complexity, you really have to dig in, go to societies and understand what's happening in schools. And on one side, the UN, through UNESCO as a secretariat, we're working on transforming education. And then thinking at the same time, are we doing right for climate? Are we doing right for education? education won't be complete without climate. Climate won't be complete without education. And how we look at it, because we delve into these societies, into these schools, we have to make sure that the curricula, as Baroness mentioned, the curricula has to be tweaked for these curricula to be more green, more inclusive in terms of instilling the right values into those children at an early stage in life, the early years, grade 1 to 3, telling them about the issues of climate, and then jumping into towards skilling them and then putting these, enhancing these competencies that can enable them with these skills that then will enable them once they're in mid-school or in high school, they're already into climate, they know about the issues, you tease them when they're young. And when you build this system or an ecosystem that enables the child and makes him or her love climate and go green, that's the only way to do it. Today, if you ask me, would we at this age group be able to solve the climate issue? I would tell you a definite no. So the first thing we have to do is equip the youth of today immediately with whatever we can, but they will not solve the problem. But at the same time, we get the children of today and we instill these skills and values and extracurricular activities when it comes to green, and then the youth will become the adults of tomorrow, and the children of today will become the youth of tomorrow, and that's how you change this vicious cycle of not having anything green today into the mindsets of our children.
Thank you, Tariq. I think a really important point, same as Baroness Brown, about embedding climate in the curriculum. Charles.
Thank you very much, Alec. It's just a pleasure to be here with all of you, and collaboration with the UK government on this issue has been tremendous. Now, the Global Partnership for Education is all about transforming education systems. And it's hard to transform education systems when they're being set back constantly by natural disasters driven by climate change. Now, we've seen what's happened with COVID, with children out of school for months and years. Now that's happening all the time because of natural disasters. Those children are losing out on their education, so we must address this. So for GPE, what we do is we work with partner countries to look at it from a systems perspective. Now, we already work with them to identify what are the key risks, what are the key bottlenecks to transforming those education systems. And then we put our money, our support, our technical support, we leverage good partners from around the world to support them in achieving that objective. Specifically on climate change, though, as we go forward, we are putting much more support into supporting those countries to address climate change, to build climate thinking into their planning, into their budgets, to help them build partnerships across sectors, and to leverage co-financing. We have innovative financing mechanisms that we have already been using. We are now adapting them for climate, and we think we have some great opportunities going forward.
Thank you, Charles. I think a really important point about financing there, really important. Stefania, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. UNESCO is promoting a broader approach to education for climate change, which is part of the framework of education for sustainable development. It is about really making education the real tool concretely in schools, for teachers, in curriculum, in communities, to transmit better knowledge, to raise awareness, and to change behaviors. That's the power, transforming power of education. Within this framework, more recently, starting in Glasgow last year, together, I would say, with the UK government and the cooperation of Italy as well, we convened the very first meeting of Ministers of Education and Ministers of Environment, who are not traditionally dialogue so much and talk each other. And this is the first step of a process to gain attention, attraction to education in this context. And I think we see some results already. We are here now. There is a lot more of discussion on education. And most importantly, through the Transforming Education Summit, an initiative really ambitious, led by the UN Secretary General, we, as an outcome, we have to launch, we will do at 2:30 in the green zone, please join us. what we call together as partners and also member states the greening education partnerships. 4 areas to concretely support countries and communities to change the education systems according to the principle that colleagues already mentioned. Green in schools, green in curriculum, green in teachers' capacity to address climate change appropriately, and green in communities, because this is not simply a business of school and you know, formal learning, but it's really a question of a whole society approach, and that's our mission now.
Great, thank you for that. And I think you are reflecting the same thing that Charles and others said about collaboration. And actually, can I also give a shout out to our friends in the Italian government, and we work really well with them, and my counterpart Roberto Cingalani on the pre-COP and the youth event that we had. So thank you very much for that. Elizabeth, over to you.
So for me, for a long time, I have understood that climate education is not only about explaining the problem, but it's also about educating and empowering young people to be a part of the solution. And what I have been focusing on, like through the Green Generation Initiative, has involved teaching young children and young people that they can clean their own air, they can grow their own food, and also green their own schools through triggering initiatives within their own school compounds. And what this means is that they are not victims, because young people and children are the most affected by the climate crisis, and we also know that women and girls are the most affected by the climate crisis, and that when these impacts begin to hit harder, the empowerment and education of women and girls is also greatly affected and suffers the most. But this really shows that by doing this, they are not victims, but they're actually agents of change, doing everything that they can to create the kind of future that they actually want to see. So it is important that these efforts are actually not undermined, and that these efforts are amplified and empowered at the same time, because it is important that people are also greatly connected to what surrounds them. And for me, being in this space is greatly related to having an experience of being around nature, being around environment, being around clean streams, and being around forests that were still in the most pristine without being destroyed. But also seeing how these ecosystems continue to change over time, and seeing a challenge and being able to identify with the challenge and find a solution to it, and then step up to use our voices and our solutions to lead these initiatives. So it's really important that young people are even much more aware about the problem right now. And that is why we have so many voices and so many emerging young people right now that are speaking up, because they see the urgency of this crisis. They know that if action is not taken, then this is the generation that is going to have to live longer with the consequences. But also, they're not just influencing how people are responding to the climate crisis, but also showing that we are a part of the solution, and collective action of everyone working together to actually amplify these efforts, support these efforts, and genuinely and meaningfully engage young people is really important to make this happen.
Thank you for that, Elizabeth, and a very important message about young people being very much part of the solution. And those of you who were at COP26 will remember the very passionate and moving speech that Elizabeth gave at the World Leaders Summit. So thank you, Elizabeth, for everything that you and your cohorts are doing on this issue. So colleagues, we now move on to the second question for the panel, which is what are the most significant challenges to integrating education into global climate change discussions? So maybe I can start with Tariq, and we'll sort of work our way around. Yeah, please.
Challenges. I mean, GP and UNESCO would have a better answer, but from my point of view, to be honest with you, look, I'm very neutral. Dubai Cares is very neutral, and we work with all the sectors. And the biggest challenge we have today is mindsets. If we are not able to shift these mindsets, and I'm not talking about children here, because the children, as I spoke earlier, eventually it will be in schools, whether it's this generation or the next. It is us, it's the decision makers, it's the heads of states, it's the ministers, it's the policy makers. And if we are not able to shift these mindsets, it will be impossible Because it's very easy for a leader to stand up and say, we will be doing this in the country and we will change, and at the same time that person is not constructing an enabling environment. So that's one. Collaboration at the highest level, that is lacking globally, and UNESCO would know much more about this, and if we have all the agencies with the governments working together towards a global approach, a global agenda towards climate and education, then probably we will make it. We're talking about policies. If we keep on talking about it and talking that this country is going to open doors to the private sector, to the public sector, and even to the non-governments to come and put solutions, but at the same time you are not worrying about the policies and you're not changing policies, you're not doing anything. Because once you do the policies, as we know, then everyone will be forced towards these policies, and then the goals and the KPIs would come. And if you're not prepared in terms of a strategy and having mapped out an ecosystem on how this is going to work, that's not going to happen as well. So having an ecosystem, a strategy, and planning it towards a way that will make it click. And of course, if we're talking about climate and education, education sector has been suffering for a long time, with a lot of global donors saying there are no scientific evidence that education can eliminate poverty. And we have been fighting for more than a decade, all of us together, on this issue. It's not medicine that we can get. Now, since we have solved this issue and that dilemma is gone, and everyone is convinced that education can solve the poverty problem, I don't want to be faced with another challenge saying give us scientific evidence by going green, and green can solve the climate issue. So we do have a challenge to come, and I am a very big believer that if we put everything towards the leadership to take these steps of changing policies, I think we can make it happen.
Great, thank you, Tariq. And shifting mindsets, I think is your key message there. Charles, over to you.
I guess there are three things I would say. First one is we need to do as we're doing today, increase awareness of the role of education and climate working together. I don't believe that we can achieve our objectives in climate, nor can we achieve our objectives in education unless we're looking at them together. This is a critical move forward. How we look at both of these sectors, they have to be working together. I had a colleague once who said, development is a team sport. It's not about everybody doing their own thing, it's about working together. Second, it's about mobilizing this vast network of schools, of youth, in communities around the world who are actually at the place where they can support action in those communities to work on ecosystems, to recycle rainwater, to just think about how the actions they can take at the community level. And by doing that through the schools, you can then imbue that into the whole community and actually have a major change in our whole world. So think about that network of schools in every community and what they could do. Third, it always comes down to money. We need money. We need more money for climate education. We need better money for climate education, and that includes we need to address fiscal space, that the challenges that countries have with the debt burden, and that we need to address that so they have the ability to invest more of their resources into climate education. So those are three quick things for you.
Great, thank you so much. Networking. Okay, so Stefania, please.
Yes, I wish to focus on two dimensions, from the top and from the bottom. From the top, I think that we have to really convince the political leadership at the highest level, I mean heads of states and government. Something happened here. On Tuesday, the president of Romania and the rotatory presidency of the European Union, Czech Republic Prime Minister, convene a meeting to commit to climate change, education and sustainable development, and some 10 countries already joined. We are at the table. So, but beyond that, it's about embedding these issues into legislation. As a former senator and minister in my country, I could say that without a law which allows you to move and to change, it's really very difficult to translate these principles into action. And let me share a few data from the Global Monitoring Report, which is now processing some 50 countries' profiles, and to see where we are in terms of policies and legislation when it comes to education for climate change and sustainable development. There are some good news and some bad news. 39% of countries have included climate change content in their education laws, and it's already more than half, so it's a progress, it's a process. We are gaining some results. 45, they are including in their education sector plan, which is the second level when a law becomes policy and can give tools to teachers.
Especially for frontline communities and children, young people, women, and cause they come to support their school fees at the same time. And for this particular fact that this is a disproportionate impact of the crisis, and the fact that the people who have done the least to causes are the ones that are bearing the biggest brunt, but most of these communities are not aware of this, and if anything, they depend on their faith for hope that tomorrow things are going to get better, that tomorrow the rains are going to return. But also mandated climate education in developed nations is even more critical so that people can understand what is at stake. That just because the impacts of climate change are not happening in other parts of the world, it doesn't mean that they are not happening in issues to do with the climate.
Thank you for that, Elizabeth. And a very important point you've made again about the disproportionate impact on children and women as a result of global warming. Baron Sparrow.
Hard to follow those four very excellent analyses. I suppose what I would say is just a few things in terms of challenges. I think the first one, which we've heard a little bit about, is just making sure that this is a priority, it stays a priority, it stays in, even in rainy old England. We had some schools closed this summer because of the heat, and many parents kept their children home from school. So we're not even starting on a kind of stable footing. We're already on a pretty wobbly footing. And then, I think this definitely is in the both challenge and opportunity bucket, but critically important is just the bringing people with us. Sometimes sitting as a minister, you think you can just do it faster if you kind of do it all, as Stefania suggested, in a kind of top-down way. We can't do this down way. We can't do this in a top-down way. We have to bring people with us. We will make better policies and have better results, particularly if we bring young people with us, but also communities more broadly. And I think, if I may, just very briefly, that's where the Greening Education Partnership and the opportunities to collaborate, to learn from one another. None of us have all the answers, but working together we can really...
Idea, myself, which is that...
A couple of things for you.
Thank you, Charles. Stefania.
Out of 133 countries which committed to transform education, 2/3, 91, included education for climate change and sustainable development as part of their action plan to transform. So we have to follow up closely to make this number increasing, possibly, and of course to connect this action on the ground to the global fora, especially the next COP, to see where education should have a place. And a second point I wish to mention is the importance of new funding, new resources. It's not simply, sharing an agenda, but having the right tools, especially to support the teachers. We survey teachers last education partnership. This is the first step. We don't have the dream to have a big funds. We don't need it now, but we need also a symbolic sign to say that education for sustainable development and climate change is a priority, because it's part of the equation, as is one big part of the solution.
Great, thank you. Elizabeth.
I think there's great power in strengthening efforts to empower women and girls, because when we empower women and girls, it means that so many challenges are going to be solved for us to actually see what's at stake.
Elizabeth, I certainly agree. We have a lot of the solutions. We have a lot of solutions. Derek.
Well, we're a convener, Alok, so we partner with global entities, and if we do something good, probably is to get the whole world under one roof. So how I see it is we have to have climate and education as a main pillar in every big convening in the world. I know UNESCO in their next annual meetings, it will be greenish. The World Economic Forum, Davos, has to be green. If we're talking about the Global Refugee Forum, we are yet to speak to them. I know the World Bank is now looking into the spring meetings, into having some green discussions. Having said that, we also have the World Government Summit in Dubai, and they're working on policies. Now, we don't want to hear problems. We've heard of the problems. We've seen the problems. We live into these problems. What we need is solutions, because going ahead is about solutions. Enough with the problems. We know what the problems are. We know the consequences. We are teaching our children about these consequences. And lastly, probably in the next COP28, you might hear very soon that probably, I'm not sure Dubai Cares will be involved, and probably we will be taking a lead on the climate and education content, and probably education and climate will be a main pillar, and it will be the first COP having a full day talking about climate and education.
Well, not probably, but if you do that, we will definitely be there. Baroness Barron.
Well, you heard it first, folks. So that was fantastic news. I think I would just echo what others have said. I think we feel really strongly with Charles about the role of the NDCs and more countries including the education strategies within their NDCs, but also weaving the impact of education through their commitments in relation to adaptation and resilience. And similarly, again, the Greening Education Partnership. And I suppose the last thing that I would say is just making sure that we do that in lockstep with young people all of the way. I was incredibly fortunate to chair very regular meetings with our youth advisory panel when we were putting together our strategy. Our strategy is different thanks to them, and I know that all of you are doing that, and we know how important it is to make this really stick.
Great, thank you. Thank you to the panel. We now have time for some Q&A. So who would like to ask a question? Well, I'm going to go to the youngest person who's put their hand up first.
Hello everyone, I'm Livia Pinazzo and I'm from Brazil. I work with MOCOP and SOS UK, and we were super delighted to support the Education and Environmental Minister Summits.
Answer that question first.
Very short. Don't quote yet, okay? There will be an announcement from the UAE, hopefully in January, on who will be the COP28 lead partners on content. And let's say that education will be a main pillar at the COP28. So everything that we're talking, we're now going to see whether it's going to be a full day, it will be horizontal on every single day. But I guarantee you, and I sealed the deal yesterday, and that is by shaking hands, not by signing. So we have to wait till January, and please don't tweet about it. I beg you, don't tweet about it. But
this is being live streamed, Tarek.
Is it?
I think so.
So we're still in negotiations, and we have one more month with the UAE. But let me tell you, education will be a main pillar in COP28, I guarantee you, and Dubai Cares will be taking a lead on that.
Great, thank you. Right, second, who had?
Early stages. So I think the honest answer to that question is that we need to build in our learning and thinking about how we can share that internationally, whether it's in Kenya or elsewhere. I've got colleagues here who may be able to go into that in a bit more detail with you.
30, and we all know that year is a quite critical year. So my question from UNESCO, basically this shows that leaders, especially from the developing world, because of chronic issues like poverty and all of that, they do not have education as their priority. So my question from UNESCO is that how do you plan to approach that, making sure that education is a priority, especially for the developing world? Thank you.
Okay, why don't you ask your question, then we'll have 2 for 1.
Thank you. I'm coming from Bangladesh. You know, Bangladesh is a very climate vulnerable country. So I'm working with Malala Fund in Bangladesh, and Malala Fund's focus is on making girls climate resilient through education. So my question is to GPE and UNESCO. Particularly, I didn't find anything in the National Adaptation Plan, which has been approved by the government very recently, regarding the education that you are telling about, making, transforming curriculum, transforming teachers' capacity development, all those things. As UNESCO or GPE and or GPE, how do you like to motivate the governments like Bangladesh to include all those things in their planning, in adaptation plan, in mitigation plan, and all the indices? Thank you.
Great. Stefania?
Yeah, I think
And then
that
Charles.
what we are doing is building a movement for education on education. This is the difference between this Transforming Education Summit and all the many big summits on education we got until this year. The difference is also about bringing education as the highest level of political attention. It's not obvious that the General Assembly of the UN started, and this also is the job and the ownership of countries and member states. UNESCO, of course, is the organization which has the responsibility to monitor, to support, to assist, together with all our partners. But of course, the next step is about member states, countries, governments, listening to their communities and translating this commitment into action. I mentioned that 2/3 of these countries included climate change education and education for sustainable development in the list of priorities. Now, what we are doing is putting in practice through the global monitoring report, and we have the tools to do that, a clear process where we can see in a few months, in a few years, what's happening in terms of policies, in terms of legislations, in terms of actions on the ground. When it comes to the curriculum, and then maybe, of course, Charles would complement, I think that the work we have to do is to make ministers of education aware that this is an investment in a...
As said, obviously we work closely together. It starts by making sure we have it at the global level. It's on the global agenda, that everybody around the world is committed to achieving goals for education and climate change. At the country level, it's a matter of bringing together all the stakeholders through the national consultations process, through the process that GPE supports that builds on the national consultations, to ensure that it's not just government and maybe the donors and multilateral organizations, but it's civil society, it's youth, it's teachers, and private sector, private foundations. Everybody is around that table to identify what the critical issues are, bring their voices in on what is the most important thing to be working on. Next, I'd say it's providing information on what actually works. now you were talking about earlier the question about sharing what is working in the UK, but we need to be sharing that not just from the UK, obviously, but from around the world, from countries facing similar issues. What are they doing and how are they doing it so that everybody can be learning together? And then I think the other part of it for us is incentives. It's about financial incentives. We have a program where we're looking for a match for our funding, where we're saying we're going to put up a lot of money if we can find a 3-to-1 match. So if we're offering, let's say, $50 million for this matching program, what we're now looking for another $150 million. That would then go into that program. You're starting to talk some serious money. So, there are opportunities to get the attention not just of education ministers, not just of environment ministers, but of finance ministers. They are the key to a lot of this. So, anyway, stop there.
Thank you, Charles. We've got time for one more question, but we're going to have to be... Okay, I'll tell you what. If both of you could ask your question very quickly, we will have an answer, then I have to sum up.
Thank you. I'm Eric Giliardi, President of the Office for Climate Education under the auspice of UNESCO, and we're developing IPCC-based resources for teachers. And Stefan Gianni mentioned the central role of teachers, but also I was wondering how you plan to address the teachers' environment. So the school directors, all the level, the ministries are as important as well. So I just wanted to make this really important because we see that in our concrete projects. This is also something that needs to be addressed.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's almost the same question. My name is Hala. I come from Egypt. I work for the British Council. So
into the continuing professional development curriculum, if I can call it that, for teachers, all of the issues around climate and sustainability, as well as in our country for the governors of schools. So if you like, the wider leadership and governance team will be required in time to produce sustainability strategies for every school. Our school estate, so all of the buildings, is massive. It's about 37% of all public buildings in the UK. So it's a huge polluter, and making sure that we can turn the school estate green is a massive part of this too.
Fabulous. Thank you to the panel. They have been brilliant. And, I've done a lot of these events over the years, but we've now actually had a panel which has not only kept to time, but actually talked a lot of sense as well, which is always very encouraging. Just to sum up, 3 takeaways from this, as far as I'm concerned, from the panel. One is collaboration is absolutely key. Secondly, there needs to be political leadership. Thirdly, money. And then that very important point that Elizabeth made about young people being part of this holistic solution. Thank you all for coming, and I just want to end by saying that, as Tariq has told us, probably there will be a big focus on education at COP28. Please, round of applause to the panel. Thank you for coming.